Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing another top 5 video. So I'm really excited to do this one for you guys because this is actually going to be top 5 decks for $20 or less. And this has got a lot of really awesome decks for you guys today. So for the purpose of the video, we're just going to be talking about the deck core and not the deck as a whole, because staples in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be very expensive. Cards like Access Code Talker, Forbidden Droplets, and even Ash Blossom are really expensive cards that sometimes you have to have 2 or 3 of in the game. But you guys can use alternatives for the decks like cards like Borolo Dragon, Forbidden Dress, and even Effect Veiler as alternatives for staple cards. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out that Patreon in the description below for all those awesome awards like getting your name description in a single video, getting assigned cards in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month your patron along with test ends. And let's get straight into the list guys. So for number 5 guys, we're actually going to be talking about a really awesome rank 4 deck that can sometimes make some really amazing rank 3 plays as well, that builds on itself like a factory. And we're actually going to be talking about Yugioh, which is a really awesome deck that was actually printed in a structure deck to make this deck very cheap. The majority of the stuff in this deck has actually been printed as a common, which helps out the deck's price tag, and is a really fun rank 4 base deck that you can basically summon out any rank 4 in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! The really awesome thing about Yugioh as well is you have 2 really awesomely supported generic pools that you can play from, with rank 4s and machine monsters being able to play around in this deck, which is what's really cool. Being able to include some really awesome staple cards like Gold and Silver Gadget in this deck to make some really easy rank 4 plays helps out this deck a lot. And also being able to use cards like the extra deck monster Giganta X to be able to search any one of your machine monsters from the deck that's level 4 or lower. The fun thing about this deck is that's actually the cheapest card in the entire deck, sitting at about 50 cents, and everything else in the deck is 25 cents or less, which helps out this deck's price tag a lot. And the really cool thing about the deck is there's actually 2 ways to build this deck that are very good. You can build a deck that's actually a swarm-based deck that summons out a bunch of rank 4s to your side of the field, and ultimately making some really insane monsters like Infinitrack Megaclops. Or you can even summon out cards if you want to go a little bit more budget of a route with this particular deck. You can make it a trap-based deck where you summon out a couple of rank 4s to your side of the field and then set a bunch of back row to play against your opponent, which helps out the deck a lot to make some really insane plays and control the board with this insanely fast deck. I really love the way that Giganta plays, or Yugioh plays in this deck as well, because it can actually special summon out monsters from your deck to give you rank 4 plays, and this deck is a really budget deck for you guys. So for number 4 guys, we're actually going to be talking about a deck that plays one of the weakest monsters in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And no, I'm not talking about Karibo. We're actually talking about Skull Servants, which is a very awesome deck that has actually foreshadowed what the deck was going to do from the very beginning in the very first pack in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where Skull Servant was originally released. And I'm actually going to read to you guys the flavor text of what Skull Servant says for the foreshadowing of what their boss monster does. So with this card, actual flavor text for the original Skull Servant reads, "A skeletal ghost that isn't strong, but can mean trouble in large numbers," which is a very interesting thing for this deck to do. And what this deck actually does is it summons out their insanely powerful boss monster, King of the Skull Servants, which can actually reach insanely powerful attack points depending on the amount of Skull Servants you have in the graveyard, because it gains 1,000 attack points for every single Skull Servant in the graveyard. This card actually has a lot of support cards in the archetype that count as Skull Servant while they're in the graveyard, which is really helpful for this deck because they can get really big. From cards like the normal Skull Servant, White Mare, and even Lady in White can actually give you a bunch of attack points, having multiple copies of those cards in the graveyard. For every single one in the grave, your King of the Skull Servant will just get bigger and bigger until finally you can have a monster with upwards of like 18,000 to 20,000 attack points, which is just absolutely crazy depending on the amount of Skull Servants you play in the deck. I think usually where I get it is around 10,000 attack points, which is still pretty big whenever I play Skull Servants, but but the most expensive card in the deck is actually King of the Skull Servant, which is really kind of interesting about this deck. It's sitting at about $1, and everything else in the deck is around $1 to 75 cents or less, which is what's really cool about this deck, is it's a very budget zombie-based deck that can actually get into some of the generic zombie cards in the game as well to help out what this deck does, using staples like Unizombie, which is a very cheap staple for the deck to dump certain Skull Servants that you need to the graveyard to go into additional plays and power up your King of the Skull Servant to go in for game. So for number 3, guys, we're actually going to be talking about my go-to deck whenever I'm teaching somebody to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's actually going to be Tenyi, which is a great budget deck for anybody that just wants a really good budget deck, or they're trying to teach somebody to play Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a really fun deck that revolves around the Tenyi spirit monsters and special summoning them to your side of the field while you don't control an effect monster, which is a shared effect between all of your Tenyi spirit monsters, which is a really cool thing. I really love the way this deck plays, that you basically just special summon out one of your Tenyi spirits to your side of the field, link them away to the graveyard, and then summon out your copy of your Tenyi Monk, which is a normal Link 1 monster. Then special summoning out an additional Tenyi monster to your side of the field, and link climbing into your copy of Shaman, and then finally normal summoning a Tenyi monster to your side of the field, and linking into your copy of Berserker, and which is a really interesting play for this deck to be able to go into, because you have all sorts of follow-up plays with all of the Tenyi monsters that you actually used to link summon and link climb in this deck, which is what's really cool about the way the deck plays. It helps out the deck a lot because all of your Tenyi monsters have graveyard effects, from bouncing monsters to special summoning monsters back, adding back your Tenyis to your hand, and even having battle trap-ish effects by banishing them to the graveyard is a really interesting thing for this deck to be able to do, because none of your Tenyi spirits are ever truly gone. You can actually use them and banish them from the graveyard to get additional effects, which is super helpful for the deck. And the most expensive card for this particular deck is actually going to be Draco Berserker of the Tenyi, sitting at about $4, and you only even need one copy of it. Everything else in the deck is about $1 or less, usually coming in at about 25 cents for just about every single one of your Tenyi spirits, which helps out the budget of this deck. It's a really fun deck that you can link climb with. You can summon synchros in this deck, and you can even summon out a legendary awesome boss monster in this deck, Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, because they actually have a card that's a counter trap that if it gets destroyed, you can actually special summon out a normal monster from your extra deck, which is a really good target to summon out is Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. So you get a little bit of nostalgia in this deck too for this really awesome budget deck. So for number 2, guys, we're actually going to be talking about a deck that doesn't punch out your budget when you try and build it, and it's actually going to be Battling Boxers, which funny enough was the very first profile on the DarkArmedDuelist channel, which is really cool to be able to include the very first one in this list, which is really awesome. So this deck is a really interesting deck that actually plays around with rank 4 monsters and warrior monsters, which helps out the deck a lot to be able to include some very generic support from the rank 4 pool and the warrior pool for this deck, which helps out all the strategies in this deck. You can include cards like Awalt in this deck to go into some really interesting plays by sending equip cards from the deck to the graveyard. You can special summon your Battling Boxers and even search some of your Battling Boxers from your deck to your hand, or you can play a bunch of rank 4s in the extra deck like Tornado Dragon, Baguska, and even play around with cards like Lead Yoke, one of the cards that's the boss monster for the deck, that can actually protect itself from being destroyed by battle or by card effect just by detaching a material from it. And then it also gains 800 attack, which helps out the deck a lot to give you a monster that can summon to the field and protect itself. And the most expensive card for this deck is number 105, Battling Boxer Star Cestus, which is a really interesting monster sitting at about $3. And this deck also can rank up into a copy of number C105, Comet Cestus, which is only sitting about $1, and everything else in the deck is 50 cents or less. It's a really fun deck to play around with, and you can actually even include cards like Fire Flint Lady in the deck to help you go into your copies of your Awalt and play just about any equip spell card in the deck to help you go in for additional plays in the deck, and also even play more rank 4 monsters by using the Awalt to search your level 4 monsters from the deck. Cards like Switch Hitter being able to special summon back your Battle Unboxers from the graveyard, and cards like Headgear being able to send them from deck to graveyard helps out the deck a lot to be able to immediately get those cards back from the grave and send them to the grave, so you have those generic effects to be able to make more rank 4s in this deck. So for number 1, guys, we're actually going to be talking about a deck that won't chain down your wallet when you try and build it, and it's actually going to be Unchained. So this deck is a very awesome deck that plays 3 really good starters in the form of your 3, oddly enough, twin monsters, which is kind of weird that there's 3 twins, but it's really cool that you actually have all 3 of them in this deck, because basically they all float into other Unchained monsters when they get destroyed by battle or by card effect, which helps out this deck a lot to be able to float into other monsters using all 3 of your Unchained twins. This deck also lets you float into a really powerful main deck boss monster in Abominable Unchained Soul, which has 3,000 attack points and can special summon itself for free from your hand by just having a card on your side of the field get destroyed by battle or by card effect. Any of your monsters get destroyed by battle or by card effect, you can special summon it. If any of your spells or traps get destroyed by card effect, you can instantly special summon out this really powerful boss monster to your side of the field. You might be thinking, what am I going to do with all of these monsters that I'm summoning to my side of the field? You're actually going to start link climbing into some insanely powerful link monsters in the form of Unchained Soul of Rage, which lets you use your opponent's monsters to link climb into your copy of your Unchained Soul of Anguish. And then finally, the Unchained Abomination, which is the most expensive card in this deck, sitting at about $3. Everything else on the deck besides Rage is about 50 cents or less, and Unchained Soul of Rage is sitting currently at about $1, which is a very affordable price point for this particular deck. The really cool thing as well about this deck is all of your spells and traps in this deck float into your Unchained monsters as well when they get destroyed by card effects, which helps out this deck a lot when your opponent drops, say, a Harpy's Feather Duster against you, and you just swarm the field with all sorts of your Unchained monsters to help you link into your insanely powerful Unchained Abomination, which can actually pop up to 3 cards per turn on the field, which helps out this deck a lot to just start popping cards over and over again. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. I hope you did enjoy this list, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell on there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards, and definitely give me some suggestions down in the comments down below for some other top 5s that you guys would love to hear, and I am totally open to all sorts of ideas and love to hear from you guys for all of the different top 5 ideas that you guys have. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys!